In this video, I would like to introduce you to a technique how we could create the geometry for example, the dial and all the buttons and knobs. And then also how, for example, we can create the geometry for like the cable, etc. Because very often when you present a model, they start to look very realistic by just adding the necessary details to it. They feel complete. So we can start this by selecting certain layers to as a reference, and I click on layer 6 because I want to generate my new geometry there. I make sure my 3D cursor is at 0, 0, 0. So it is at the center of my world and my object, and then in right view I can just click to where I would like to insert my next geometry. And for this dial I can work with a circle, 32 vertices, maybe 1 inch radius, not 1 foot. Going to edit mode, or actually in object mode, and move it to the right slightly, and then in edit mode, maybe press E and extrude geometry down, and I overshoot, so which means I sink it into my model. And then maybe up here, E and Z, move it up, and then E and S, scale it inwards, and F to close it. Adding a subsurface modifier with a level of 2. AA, select everything, and shade everything smooth. Okay, doesn't look too bad. Maybe at this point I can think about, do I want, for example, a round button, or maybe do I want more button with flat sides, or maybe with a slight arc. So GG I can slide now in this version of Blender. Also works just with an edge or a point. So you see GG then goes into vertex slide. If you have an edge selected, or 2, GG goes into edge slide. If you have a complete loop selected, GG goes into loop slide. So that's quite nice. So I decided to give it a small arc, maybe this one. I scale up a little bit. Okay, let's say this is nice. Okay, so now how do I create all those different small geometry parts to snap onto? Okay, so let's start with something very simple. So first, I make sure I have my cursor snapped to the object center of this button. And this step is very crucial because at the center of this button, I would like to create a new object. And I'm just going to use a cube. Maybe again, just, oops, not cube, like 1 inch. Sorry, let's do that again, because by accident I moved it. Okay, 1 inch, and I can scale it down. And then in edit mode, after scaling, I move it to there. And maybe from a side, I move it to here. Because the reason why this is very important with the object centers all being at the same position, right there I'm also going to add an empty. Maybe this empty I call button array empty. Actually, hold on, I call this empty button array. And the reason why very often I use empties a lot, and when you go into object selection, you see it's cube, 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 but here I have empty button array, empty image, empty image. So because all these empties start with empty, they're all grouped in a list. So this makes more sense. And then maybe this one I decide to be 1.5 inches. I do not scale don't scale, just change the display size through the setting here. And the main reason for this is actually, if I now go to this button or this cube, I go to Modifier, Generate, and I select Array. And with Array, you have the ability to just replicate an object. And when I change one object once, you see it's kind of like this piece is being cloned and then based on this matrix being duplicated. However, this we don't really need. But maybe count I set to 10 because we have the ability to use a foreign object for the array. So for example, object offset, and then I can type in empty, and there I find array. I could also type in array and then it filters out the empty, which has array in the name. Press enter. And nothing really changed. Well, you know, if I move this one now, you can see that this is kind of like my offset linearly. But so similar to using this, but what I actually would like to use is the rotation. So you see if I rotate this one, it basically duplicates or erases all these clones on a circular path. But now my question is, well, how many elements do I need to nicely fill this area? First, I mean, this is a little bit, those buttons are too big. So maybe I select everything and press SX and scale them down, maybe like this. But now I don't really have enough, so maybe a count of 20. The problem then is, how do you know how much do we have to rotate this one? Well, it's not really that difficult because we work with one full rotation, that is 360 degrees. So when we select the empty, we could say rotate this one 18 degrees because 360 divided by 20 is 18. And there, it perfectly fits. Now we can't forget about the empty and focus on those buttons, on those elements. And maybe let's give it first a level 2 subdivision. Let's shade it soft. And maybe this lower edge I'm going to delete. The main reason is so the surface starts to open. And maybe I add a loop cut and I add a loop cut. So now, for example, I can start working. Just push those down. Maybe start sculpting this. And then based on how I would like this to look, I have different ways how I could do this. I mean, I could also actually, hold on. I select all those edges here. Hold on. This is actually difficult to see. So I'm just selecting all those edges. Simply because I'm going to remove them. So now I can just focus, for example, from a side, how maybe my geometry flows over my button. So this one goes to here, this one maybe goes to there, to there. This one maybe should go to there. Okay. And then maybe I select those sides, and then from a side view, I simply press E, extrude, and move it inwards. Perfect. Because again, all we need to do is just generate surfaces that intersect each other. So what that means is if I go quickly into like a cut view, you can see that this button geometry and those additional like geometry pieces to kind of like to give you some extra grip kind of like intersect. So later we could just calculate them against each other and generate a new surface out of it. So it doesn't really matter how it looks inside. That's actually really fine. And then maybe if I would like to play a little bit more with it, maybe those points I could select again and scale together to tighten those parts slightly. Okay, I think this actually looks quite nice. Then maybe you could go back and see, well, how does this look like? Well, maybe here we just play with this a little bit. So those things don't really stick out that much. Yeah, that seems to be fine. Now inside the reference image, you see you have the white dial that rotates and the blue part. So we can do something similar there as well. So maybe here, this rim or this loop cut. I now press Ctrl B or I type in spacebar in bevel. And I move my mouse slightly. Kind of like this. Not too far apart from each other. And then I add another loop cut, 2 cuts on the inside. Press Enter. And then in edge face mode, Alt click, I select this complete ring. Press E and then S to scale. And then Shift Z because I only want them to scale along the X and Y axis, not along Z. So vertically they stay the same size. So this is actually similar to kind of like an offset. And maybe like this, maybe, oops, wrong direction, maybe one more cut. And again, for prototyping, this might not necessarily be, of course, the correct way, but when you create a model just to play through ideas or proportions, that's more than perfectly valid. And yeah, I can use the image maybe as a reference for height, and it looks like everything is correct. So that's basically the way how I could quickly with an array modifier create a button like this. Now let's take a look at the bottom part, the top part. That's a different type of button because we have, instead of geometry coming out, we have geometry coming in. So I'm actually selecting all this, press Shift D and duplicate it. Cursor to selection, and then here maybe S and Z. Scale everything down. So you see I just recycled some of that geometry. And now I'm going to scale this one down towards the 3D cursor. Maybe like this. Okay. However, what I have to do here is the following. Let's select all those objects. Control I and then H, hide everything else. Now instead of going out of the object, I would like this to go into my object. So here actually, how do we do this? Yeah, I'm going to select those points and delete those, simply because I'm going to patch in those faces again. Two loop cuts, 0 and enter, and then the outside loop cuts. For example, I move out. So you see, instead of just rebuilding everything, I just try to recycle parts of that geometry. Okay, this one has to go down. I'm turning that array modifier off for a second because it was confusing me slightly. Okay, and of course those faces here, so those, they have to stick out like this. Okay, perfect. Because now I can go and say Boolean. This object is called cube08, which is not really very usable. So for example, first I call this one dial top, and then maybe dial detail top. And I can type in tile detail top and difference. Let's see. We might have to close this, so I press F to fill it. And here comes the bridge command. So with Alt click, I select this profile, deselect kind of like those corner edges, and then I press spacebar, bridge, and it bridges this part for me. And let's see. No, that's not the way how it should look like. And that's probably because I have to flip the direction. Let's show where the normals. Okay, maybe let's go face inwards, 0.1 inch for the display. Oh, that's not good. Oh, there it is. I confused myself. Okay, so see basically the space I cut out, and then if I turn my array on, and let's add an edge split. There we see now my dial where the space of those buttons basically I cut out. But maybe these buttons are now, in terms of the size, way too small. Maybe they're not really providing adequate grip. So probably what I should do in this case is, well, 10 might maybe be better. This means this button has to be changed. So for example, 360 divided by 10 is then 36. So for the empty, I type in 36. Then that fits. And maybe here I increase the size of this. And let's take a look. Yeah. So there you see now that we can play with this a little bit more. maybe this loop cut, I would like to be bigger. This one bigger. And this loop cut be bigger. Also, I would like this to look soft. Okay, there. That's actually not too bad. We can leave it at this point. Now, one detail we cannot do, you see those edges are actually sharp. That is a certain feature we cannot do in this environment right now. But further down the semester, I will show you then the approach where this detail, and I would call this only really a feature because this is not kind of like essentially defining your model. It's more a softening of an edge, so you give kind of like a surface quality to your product. That feature in general also we would tackle at the end of your design process. Because it could still happen that maybe we change the whole style of those buttons or those cutouts, and then you would have to redo all those edge roundings. So having said a lot of words, basically what this means, well, we can't really do this right now. It's actually not really a problem because it focuses us also mainly more on the conceptual development of our design than really trying to make a really good looking model. This one is a little bit irritating, so maybe I could change them to wire. So I will see them there, but they're not really like solid. But even this could be maybe a little bit irritating. So maybe at this point I put those onto a layer below. So I have here this layer, my tiles, my iron, and there's this part that I use for cutting out that space. And maybe even those, for example, I put to this layer as well. So if I take a look at the beauty of my design here, I'm not distracted by any construction geometry.